Mark, do you see I invited you? Oh, here you are. Okay, perfect. Hi, how are you, Mark?
I'm well, Jen. Thank you for asking.
Good. Um, so I want to welcome you guys to the show. I see everybody kind of coming in here now. Um, Thank you to everyone who is joining us. I'm Jen, and I'm I'm actually really personally excited for this talk. I always say that everything is evolving so quickly, and I feel like DeFi especially is constantly evolving, and things are constantly happening within the DeFi space. And with new opportunities kind of coming about and being created, I feel like they should really be explained and explored in order to be understood. So I'm really happy to have you guys with me today. I'll introduce you a little bit. You can introduce yourselves. I've got Darren Langley here of RocketPool and Mark Richardson of Bancor. Thank you guys for joining me.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, absolutely. Darren, if you wouldn't mind maybe just starting off for us, maybe just introduce yourself and tell us how you got into crypto and how that kind of led you to RocketPool.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Darren Langley. Obviously, I am the general manager of RocketPool. So I started in crypto about mid 2017. So I'm like an obsessive learner, and crypto and blockchain are one of those areas where there's lots of facets to learn. So I kind of dived into that rabbit hole. Into lots of different areas. So I'm originally a software developer. So I got into smart contract development and was helping a kind of a local developer do some ICO token audits. So I was doing that for a while, and then I met David, our founder, the RocketPool founder, at an Ethereum meetup, and we got on really well. And I kind of instantly saw, how fantastic RocketPool was, the idea, and the fact that Dave had, got a working prototype and all this sort of thing. And it was, I loved the idea. I saw the potential in it. So I started working as a dev with RocketPool then, and then kind of progressed to kind of the GM today.
That's interesting that you started working as a developer, and now you're a general manager. It's kind of neat. Like, did you actually go ahead?
Yeah, well, so I started as a dev, but before that, I was like a product manager and a kind of a manager of teams and that sort of thing before that. But when I got into crypto, I decided to take a step back, I guess. I always loved building things, so it wasn't necessarily a step back. But I really the opportunity at RocketPool was too good to miss. So I kind of
I understand.
jumped into it and got involved.
Do you ever do work as a developer still? Out of curiosity?
No. I mean, having technical skills is extremely handy, particularly in a kind of a smaller company, because you can kind of dive in and do little things, but not necessarily development, because that is it takes too much of my. You need to be very, very focused, and I am kind of bouncing around lots of different things as a GM. So it's a very different way of approaching it.
I could imagine that as a developer and a GM, that's more than a full plate.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you. Mark, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and same, how'd you get into crypto and how did it lead you to Bancor?
Yeah, certainly. So I don't come from a software development background. I was an organic synthetic chemist. I completed my my PhD in Australia. I did a postdoctoral. I completed a postdoctoral program in California, and then a second one when I returned to Australia. And so, yeah, my background is very sort of like analytical, but also I would say quite creative. Like organic chemistry is very much a building things discipline. And so, yeah, I think that in crypto, I saw an opportunity to sort of exercise those two skills, but in a completely different context. I met the Bancor founders actually as just as a community contributor when I was drafting proposals and policies for the DAO to consider. And eventually they've reached out to me with an offer for full-time employment, and I accepted that in January of 2021, and I've now been with Bancor for about a year.
Awesome, thank you. So Darren, you said that when you met the guys from RocketPool, you really just couldn't pass up the opportunity to join that team. Can you tell us what exactly is RocketPool? And what was it about it that really caught your attention? What was the inspiration behind what they were working on?
So the inspiration behind RocketPool comes back to Vitalik, actually, or everything comes back to Vitalik. So he released a paper in 2016 called the Move paper, which was essentially the first kind of documented minimum proof of stake for Ethereum. And David, our founder, kind of saw that, absolutely loved it, and thought there was kind of like an idea there, an opportunity there, particularly kind of analogous to the proof of work mining pools that you have today, but in a kind of proof of work setting. That idea is kind of iterated on and refined over the last few years, obviously. So RocketPool kind of started in about 2016, and Ethereum proof of stake is developed, as I said. It was originally kind of a smart contract based proof of stake system. They ditched that idea and went with the beacon chain, which was a great idea. It was the beacon chain is a much better, more elegant solution. And we've kind of worked alongside that. So essentially, we've worked kind of in parallel with Ethereum to bring this kind of product to the market. So up until quite recently, RocketPool itself wasn't possible. So we've always kind of lived on the bleeding edge of that kind of wave, I guess. So smart contract withdrawals were only really implemented at the beginning of this year, or implemented into the spec. And so we've been working on our product, refining it and building it out and adding new things to it. And we eventually released it in November 2021, so last year. And it's gone fantastically well. So we're now the second largest liquid staking provider. We've got about 120,000 ETH being staked. We're now responsible for 1% of all Ethereum validators. And I guess, and also, so what it is, it's a decentralized Ethereum staking protocol. So as far as I'm aware, we are the first and we are the only decentralized Ethereum staking protocol. And I guess our goal is to make Ethereum staking available to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you for the explanation. I want to get back to that, but Mark, before we do, would you tell us a little bit about Bancor?
Yeah, certainly. So when Bancor was first conceived, it was actually a community currency protocol. Actually, it wasn't even a protocol back then. It was just a sort of a company that experimented with the idea of community currencies. At that stage, our chief economist was Bernard Leither, who is the same gentleman that was responsible for the invention of the euro. And so inventing new currencies was kind of something that was built into Bancor's DNA, I would say, straight from its conception. There were a couple of different experiments that were running at the time, a handful in Africa. There were also some in North America that were, intended to establish whether or not community currencies was something that could realistically compete with sort of a government issued fiat model of currency and value transfer between individuals. And it turns out it is a very good system, in that as long as the value being transferred between community members is value that was generated within that community, then the community currency makes a lot of sense. When that model starts to fall over, however, is when value from outside of that community needs to sort of be funneled in, or when value generated within that community needs to be funneled out. So a good example of that is, for example, when you need to buy gasoline, or if you need to buy produce from a local, from a farm that isn't a local farm or something like that. All of these issues, or sorry, not even issues, but all of these types of exchange basically require that community currency to know its value versus something else, because the person that's providing that good or service, for example, in the case of the non-local farmer, the community currency, if you're expecting to pay for those goods with it, needs to know its value versus something else, so that the person outside of that community can use it for whatever they want. And so this was really the beginning of Bancor's mission into automatic market making, because they realized that this is this problem of exchange and knowing exchange value between currencies and community currencies is something that needs to be addressed if any of these models are ever going to progress outside of the experiment stage and actually move into something that's more transformative. And so one of the Bancor founders, E.L. Herzog, was really looking into that specific problem, and eventually conceived of the AMM concept, which gave birth to the idea of liquidity pools, bonding curves, and pool tokens. And that's what Bancor went to its ICO with in 2017. And that really sort of marked the beginning of DeFi. There wasn't really a word for DeFi yet. It was still just traditional finance, I guess. But what Bancor really pioneered was this idea that you don't need to entrust a person with valuing any currency versus another currency. That there is a way that can be performed algorithmically. And that was, that's the genesis of the AMM idea. And so we've been here, sort of servicing that economic primitive since since all those years ago. And it's, I would say, become a more general problem, right? The scope of the decentralized exchange primitive is continuing to grow, and we're continuing to address problems with that way of doing things. So as a challenge to the order book model, and I would say a decentralized, crowdsourced alternative to exchange liquidity, we have discovered let's say a collection of nuanced sort of weirdness along the way, and some of these things are familiar and some of them aren't. One of the most prominent, let's say, user-facing issues of this model is something called impermanent loss, which is a kind of financial downside risk that a lot of liquidity providers have to suffer, or at least are asked to suffer by the protocols that they interact with. And so after this constant function market making process was really out in the wild, and after impermanent loss was established as kind of a bona fide risk of protocol interaction, Bancor set out to sort of address that problem first, and then also a couple of other nuances that were associated with it, things like capital inefficiency, for example. And so in version 2 Bancor introduced what was then called amplified liquidity. And this is now sort of colloquially known as concentrated liquidity. But this was actually 8 months before the launch of Uniswap v3, and it was a slightly different model. It didn't work the same way as Uniswap v3, but the idea, the premise behind it is pretty similar. The idea that you don't need to supply the entire curve in order to create markets. You can force all of the liquidity between a tighter range and then offer better slippage, for example. So the amplified liquidity was the way that we wanted to address what we saw as capital inefficiency. But then more importantly, we also wanted to use the increased volume in fees that was implied to address this impermanent loss, right? The downside risk of providing liquidity. And we were successful in one of these things, but not the other. So after version 2 was released, there was a huge amount of volume and fees associated with the new amplified liquidity model. But the impermanent loss costs of running the protocol were non-zero. And essentially, we learned that type of amplified liquidity model was not going to be a permanent solution, right? That the costs of running that type of system were just too high. And so we quickly followed that up with version 2.1, which basically sacrificed the amplified liquidity component in order to introduce an insurance schedule that protects liquidity providers from that impermanent loss cost. And this is the version that's been out in the wild now for since I think October of 2020. So over the course of 2021, we were able to really observe and stress test the robustness, the resilience of the impermanent loss insurance mechanisms. And to our delight, it actually looks like it's got a lot of staying power and that it's quite robust. And so as as I get to the end of this introduction, which I'm sure some would say it's probably gone on a little too long, just want to say that the next version of Bancor is just around the corner, and it's continuing to iterate and innovate on top of on top of the AMM concept, as I would say that Bancor has always done.
Thanks, Mark. As you were speaking, I was actually thinking about how nice it is. I mean, you see all of these new projects entering the space, and I think it's fantastic that it's growing. But it's also really nice, like Darren, you said that RocketPool has been in the works since 2016 and was finally able to, go live November 2021. And Bancor being so early to the space and continuing to innovate, it's really neat being able to speak with both of you, having been in this space with such visions early on. Darren, so you both have to do with staking, right? And I say you as in RocketPool and Bancor. But Darren, you mentioned liquid staking, and for anybody that doesn't know, the whole discussion we're having is liquid staking and derivatives and new DeFi composability, but that might seem like a lot of words for anybody who's not familiar. So I kind of want to talk about staking versus liquid staking. Like, what's that comparison? What's the difference?
Okay, so staking in terms of Ethereum staking, which is kind of where I have most of the experience, is so Ethereum proof of staking. It comes with some barriers to entry. So you need you need exactly 32 ETH, and you also need a kind of moderate technical ability to run a validator, which is this program that you run on your machine, and it kind of essentially secures the blockchain. So, and also it's illiquid in the sense that, especially at the moment, it's a one-way ticket. So you send your ETH to the beacon chain, and it will come back eventually when withdrawals are implemented, which hopefully will be beginning of next year. But even if withdrawals were implemented, you'd have some sort of amount of time that you would need to lock up your ETH so that you could perform your validator duties. So essentially, that's kind of illiquid. You can't get it back, and at least not quickly. So what liquid staking is essentially tokenized staked ETH. So it's a token that represents ETH that is being staked in the Ethereum proof of stake system. But it also represents not only the value of the ETH, but also the rewards that it generates. So the Ethereum proof of stake system, when you validate transactions and all this sort of thing, when you participate in the proof of stake system, it rewards you for doing that. So it actually gives you around 4.8% return on the Ethereum that you've staked. That number is actually very likely to go up considerably once the merge happens, because at the moment, proof of work miners get all of the transaction fees, and when the merge happens, all those transaction fees will go to proof of stake validators. So that interest rate will go up, or that rate will go up higher. So the idea is that liquid staking is this token that represents the Ethereum that's being staked, and it generates this yield. It's essentially a yield-bearing token. So for RETH, you get around kind of just over 4%. As I said, you'll get more post-merge. So what the great thing about this type of staking, I guess, is that the yield comes from Ethereum itself. So obviously there's some smart contract risk and all of that sort of stuff, but you have that with everything in DeFi. But essentially the yield is essentially the safest because the counterparty is Ethereum itself. So it's a very kind of safe form of yield. And as I said before, with this tokenized stake, it's liquid because you can, even though withdrawals aren't even implemented, you can actually take that tokenized staked ETH and sell it to somebody else. So you can either use the RocketPool website to do that, or you can use AMMs such as Bancor. So that's the idea.
And our ETH is on Bancor, right? So you deposit your ETH onto RocketPool, you get our ETH, you're earning your rewards, then you take your our ETH, deposit that on Bancor. Mark, maybe you can jump in here. I had Darren kind of explain a little bit on like staking with RocketPool. Now that I've got my our ETH on Bancor, maybe you can, now I'm earning fees. It's whitelisted, right? Yeah. And I'm earning my rewards.
Yeah. So essentially the inability to withdraw from Beacon Chain right now means that there is demand for liquidity of these kinds of staking derivatives. So if you have Ethereum staked on Beacon Chain and you're receiving a tokenized version of that stake, then you could say that swapping that stake for something else is akin to withdrawing it, or at least that's a good way to think about it. I'm not sure if Darren would agree that that's a good analogy, but I think it's the one that I prefer.
I agree.
Oh, great. Yeah. But another way to think of it is that the wrapper, right, the derivative of the staked ETH, it also becomes a commodity in and of itself. And so it's it can have a realizable price versus any other asset, the same way that all cryptocurrencies on AMMs can have a realizable price. So it could be, and this is something that actually I can see Patrick Fitzgerald is on the call with us. Something that he and I have spoken about at great length. is whether or not these kinds of staking derivatives are likely to become the predominant liquidity, compared to the underlying token that is that's being staked in the first place. There's no clear answer to this, by the way. But essentially your ETH becomes represented by some wrapper as you stake it on Beacon Chain, and then you can use that in place of the ETH itself. So if you were providing liquidity with ETH on Bancor before, but you decide you wanted to participate in Beacon Chain staking, then you can take your ETH out of Bancor, go and stake it on Beacon Chain, which will then stake it with RocketPool on Beacon Chain, which will then return to you some wrapped version of it, and then you can provide liquidity with that instead. And as you're providing liquidity with it, that gives other users of the RocketPool staking solution access to the ability to exit from that position should they want it. And it also gives other users the ability to enter into that position by buying the RETH wrapper rather than providing ETH directly, which also is an elegant and efficient way of participating in Beacon Chain staking without providing ETH directly.
That makes so much sense. I didn't even see it from that angle. But to just buy the RETH, it's like you're automatically just supplying it, ETH onto RocketPool. That makes so much sense. So
yeah, this is kind of the beauty of tokenizing stuff, right? Is that you can end up in the same position as having completed an activity as just buying the result of completing that activity from someone else.
I feel like DeFi is a rabbit hole, crypto is a rabbit hole, DeFi, but then you go into this and it's like a whole nother realm. So Darren, you mentioned, like smart contract risks, whenever you're participating, you kind of always think like risk versus reward. So I can see where the reward is coming. You're earning those rewards when you provide ETH and you can deposit your RETH on Bancor and you're earning the fees and you're earning that yield. What about the risks, you guys? Is it just the generic, I shouldn't say generic, but the smart contract risks that we pretty much all DeFi users are aware of? Or do you see any reason, I guess, that someone wouldn't be a fan of liquid staking or hesitate to participate in DeFi on this level?
Yeah, I think so smart contract risk is one thing, but one thing to bear in mind is to do your research on the protocols that you are depositing into. RocketPool itself has undergone numerous audits from the best kind of auditors that are available. So that sort of thing you have to kind of bear in mind when you do that sort of stuff. So RocketPool also has a lot of kind of mechanisms in place to protect our liquid staking holders. So for example, our node operators all they will bring their own ETH to the protocol. And essentially, this is really important because they've got skin in the game. It means that if they underperform, if they get slashed, for example, then their ETH is affected first and not our ETH holders. So essentially, we have these kind of protection measures in place for that sort of thing as well. So that's I mean, DeFi is a very new thing, and it will mature and it will get easier and it'll get safer. But yeah, I think the only other thing is probably liquidity. At the moment, our deposit pool, which is essentially where we get our liquidity and for enabling people to exit the RETH position, is maxed out. So it's got 2,000 ETH in it. So there's a fair amount of liquidity in there for that. And then there's obviously AMMs, including Bancor, that have liquidity as well for that. That would probably be the only real thing. As we were saying before, RETH is just ETH. So from a value perspective, it's exactly the same. In actual fact, pretty much anywhere where you would use ETH, you can use RETH. The only thing at the moment you can't do is pay gas with it, but in the near future, that may well be possible as well. So it's kind of RETH is a productive asset. ETH is obviously great, but it's a non-productive asset. Actually, one thing about Bancor that I should probably mention that is a big advantage for yield-bearing tokens is the single-sided exposure. So traditionally, you have to take both sides of the AMM, as you probably guys know. You need to have, so for example, in RETH's case, you would have to have RETH and then you would have to have ETH. So effectively, that means that half of your kind of pool is not productive because it's just plain ETH. Whereas the other half, RETH, is actually earning interest because it's yield bearing. With single-sided exposure, it means that you can go all of it is RETH, all of it's productive, and so that's one kind of big advantage in terms of single-sided exposure, providing liquidity on single-sided exposure.
So you might not be able to get your ETH back at the moment, but like by using Bancor, you can just swap your RETH for ETH if you wanted to. You brought up staking on Bancor. Mark, do you want to tell us a little bit about staking on Bancor? You know, we spoke on staking with RocketPool, but tell us about the single-sided, and you know, B3 is going to be coming up. I've heard a lot about the BNTKN. Sure. That's kind of where these derivatives come in and this liquid staking now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as Darren has been so kind to introduce, Bancor, in addition to its impermanent loss features, it has a bunch of other things that it's been working on, and one of the, I would say, less appreciated or sort of more complex or more nuanced versions of providing liquidity on Bancor as opposed to other AMMs is this single-sidedness. And that means that, you know, rather than having a prescribed basket of assets that the protocol requires from users, instead, users on Bancor can create their portfolio in any way that they like, including with just one token. And so, for example, you know, Bancor has, I think, both RPL and also RETH. And so if you wanted to provide liquidity with either one of those tokens in any ratio, you would be able to do so long as there is staking capacity left in that pool. And what I mean by staking capacity is that the Bancor DAO sets a limit on precisely how much capital it's willing to insure per asset. So when a pool is created, there is a known depth that pool can essentially reach before the pool will stop accepting any additional liquidity. And so this means that there's been sort of competition for space, right? The liquidity providers are, you know, kind of need to be well motivated and early acting in order to guarantee that they can actually get their liquidity into the Bancor network and benefit from that impermanent loss insurance. And if they still want to provide liquidity after the protocol is no longer accepting it, then they basically have to go to one of our competitors. And so this means two things. One, that the user experience has been imperfect, right? It really sucks to go to all this effort marketing the advantages of Bancor to the wider community, only to have them show up and tell them to go somewhere else. So that feeling of wasted effort or rejection is certainly a compromised user experience. And then the other one is that bottlenecks the growth of the TVL of the network, right? So unlike other protocols where it's possible to accept any amount of capital into the system and then sort of be able to use that to advertise how strong your economy is, or how popular your protocol is. Bancor has quite deliberately restricted that growth so that we don't exceed the risk tolerance of our insurance mechanisms. And so what's really important to realize here is that in version 3 that a lot of those frictions are being are being removed. So the concept of the infinity pool, which is sort of a marketing term that describes the new contract arrangement on version 3, is that the Bancor protocol will now be able to accept an unlimited amount of liquidity in whatever tokens the user is happy to provide. And because of the new organization of the contracts, it's still the case that the DAO can manage its insurance obligations in a very healthy and reasonable way. It just means that essentially the order of events is being reorganized. So rather than the DAO deciding on limits first and then having liquidity providers interact with the protocol, we can do that in the reverse order. So the DAO can know ahead of time how much liquidity it has to work with, and then decide how much of those tokens should be used to make markets, which is just a much better way to do things.
What about the BNTKN that I keep hearing all about?
Yeah. So in version 2.1, there were still double-sided pool tokens, but they're obscured from view. These are created in the instant that you are providing your liquidity, and then they are immediately staked in an insurance protection. So in the impermanent loss protection contracts. So they're still there, but we use them for another purpose, which is for tracking users' impermanent loss, and then making sure that they are appropriately compensated when they decide to remove their liquidity from the protocol. And so with version 3, we've decided that that system really needs to be retired. It's while it has served our community well and it's allowed Bancor to offer things like impermanent loss insurance and single-sided staking for over a year, it's really using sort of technology that wasn't that was never developed for single-sided staking or impermanent loss protection. So what we've decided to do is to completely overhaul the system and basically, design it with the assumption that impermanent loss protection and single-sided staking are first-class citizens of the system. And one of the ways that that's manifested is with the introduction of single-sided liquidity tokens. And so these are the BN tokens that you're referring to, Jen. And so similar to RPL, wherein you provide ETH and receive RETH as the derivative. On Bancor's version 3, if you provide, for example, ETH, you will receive BN ETH as the derivative. So, RETH and BN ETH are fairly similar conceptually, except that for RETH, the source of its value appreciation is the validator network on Beacon Chain. And for BN ETH, the source of its value appreciation is trading fees and potentially rewards on the Bancor network after Bancor version 3 is released. And so that it's not something that's specific to ETH, but for any whitelisted asset, including BNT itself. So any user that stakes any token on the Bancor network in version 3 will receive the wrapper, BN TKN for that stake, representing that stake. And that means that, we have essentially a fully fungible, fully composable system. Those wrapped assets are transferable just like any other ERC20 token is, and that is that's going to provide some interesting new features to how Bancor is operating and the kinds of ways that it can support the rest of the DeFi industry. I'd actually, I'd like to raise this this question with Darren. I think it's a natural way to progress the conversation from here. But yeah, Darren, like, do you see that, for example, if once ETH 2.0 is here, how do you think that that's going to affect the markets for wrappers of Ethereum? Like, do you think that it's reasonable to assume that most ETH being traded is actually going to be some, staking derivative of the ETH rather than the ETH that it's itself? Or, if not the majority, do you think it's going to become like a significant proportion of that liquidity? I'm wondering, whether or not you think that, eventually ETH as the tradable asset is going to become sort of obscured from view and replaced with, that it's, staking derivative will be the preferred commodity over the underlying asset.
Yes, that's what RocketPool is kind of banking on, I guess. So it's kind of, for me, it seems inevitable. What post merge. So at the moment, Ethereum proof of stake is about kind of 4.5% or 4.8% kind of yield. Post merge, it's going to be closer to like 9 to 12%, if you include transaction fees and all of that sort of thing. So, to be honest, there's not much point in holding ETH. You might as well hold RETH because it is a productive asset versus a non-productive asset. You might as well, but there's no kind of disadvantage with holding RETH in the sense that you'll be able to use it across DeFi and interact with it in any way that you would usually use ETH. As I said before, the only thing you can't do is pay gas, but Vitalik has already said that there's some stuff in the works to deal with that as well. So I don't really see kind of much difference really. Your main asset will probably be RETH rather than ETH.
Yeah, I think that's a strong possibility as well. And it's something that I spent a lot of time thinking about. One of the, I think that it's entirely possible, especially with ETH, because it is going to become so superfluous, right? Sorry, not superfluous, but so ubiquitous, right? That I do think that the demand for staking is going to be huge. And we've already seen a sort of a large number of these different, wrappers kind of, let's say rise to prominence. I just want, can I get you to confirm with me quickly? So the our ETH is equivalent to 1 ETH at all times, right? Like this is it's sort of a rebasing token, not a true pool token in that sense.
No, it's not. So it's not a rebasing token. So okay. How our ETH works is effectively it doesn't increase in quantity, it increases in value. So so with the rebasing token, the longer you hold it, so let's say you had 100 of this rebasing token, it would always be pegged to ETH, but you would get more. So you'd get like 5, 10, 15, 20 more on top of that. With RETH, what happens is it's actually based on its exchange rate. So RETH on day one, when we released our protocol, was 1-to-1. But now, I'll get the exact number, but let's say it's 1.01 or something like that. So it is increasing in value against ETH. So essentially what happens is you stake your ETH or you swap. And all you, as I said before, to stake ETH, all you need to do is swap ETH for RETH, and you are accruing that value. So you swap ETH for RETH on day one, and then months or days later or years later, you swap it back. You will get more ETH than you started with. That's essentially how that works. That has a number of really kind of good benefits. The main benefit is that with a rebasing token, in a lot of jurisdictions, essentially you're going to get hit with capital gains or income on that, on a kind of whenever the rebasing token issues the new quantity. With RETH, you don't do that. It's one. It's basically when you swap, you get that value. So yeah, that's how it works.
Right. And so then there are similar products to RocketPool, right? Like things like Stakehound, which had some issues, I think, with Fireblocks last year. But then other sort of staking services that are also offering wrappers. Do you see that? I agree with you, by the way, that the pool token component, right? The RETH model, where it just appreciates versus ETH over time, is its ability to eliminate tax drag for users is incredibly important. But then also means that the RETH token is potentially arbitrageable, for example, versus some other stake derivative of ETH and versus ETH itself. So let's say that that these wrappers do become the preferred way to trade ETH. I'm just wondering if you how you see that playing out both in DeFi, which I think is unusually well equipped to handle this, but also in CeFi. Like, do you think people will be comparing, doing their technical analysis with the RETH chart versus USD, to make their trades, or do you see that we could have an RETH ETF or something in the future? I'm wondering just how pervasive do you think that this pool token wrapper component could be, if not just from RocketPool, but as a sort of an industry-wide replacement for Ethereum?
Yeah, so the staking industry at the moment is kind of a spectrum. So it's like a spectrum of centralization. Or centralization custodianship. So there is on one end, you've got exchanges who are custodial. You actually have to give them your ETH for you to stake it. They run all of the validators and all of that sort of thing. And then on the very far end, so that's on the centralized end. On the very far end, you've got RocketPool. We are non-custodial and we are decentralized. So what that means for us is that, so with RocketPool, so RocketPool as a company, we do not run any validating nodes. All of that is done by kind of a permissionless network of node operators. So basically, instead of having all these validators that we own and we manage, so we have node operators. We have a set of smart contracts, which is the protocol. The protocol actually intermediates and brings those two parties together. So it's like a matchmaking service for Ethereum staking. You've got, on one side, you've got liquid stakers who are depositing ETH, and that goes into like a pool. And then on the other side, you've got node operators who are spinning up validators and matching. So they bring 16 ETH, and then we match 16 ETH from liquid staking deposits. We put those two things together to make 32 ETH, and then that goes off to the beacon chain and earns the rewards and all of that sort of thing. So essentially, we've got this kind of network of permissionless node operators. We've got 870 of them on board at the moment. So, and they're spinning up validators and essentially taking the demand for RETH. So, yeah, 870 validators is quite decentralized. And it kind of matches the principles of Ethereum. What's really, I can't really stress how important decentralization is. So Ethereum is decentralized, but it's tending towards centralization. So we have to be very vigilant, and we have to keep kind of making sure that we pull it in check. But decentralization is really important initially for kind of operational resilience. It also makes more decentralization makes it more secure. So, for example, if somebody's data center, if a big exchange's data center got hacked, then they control a large portion of the Ethereum network, which is not what we want. So it's operationally more resilient. It's so again, if the data center gets hit by lightning, you don't get a big part of the network go down. It's more secure, but then you get all these other things like censorship resistance and credible neutrality. So, and they're really important. And as you get more centralized, you start losing those important characteristics. So at RocketPool, we've kind of made a big effort, and we've spent 5 years building, a decentralized protocol to actually do this, so that we are kind of doing it in a way that's the most healthy for the Ethereum kind of ecosystem.
Yeah, I hear that. And so I think that the thing that I wanted to bring attention to on this call is the idea that for something like Ethereum validators, I should say Ethereum validation, something like staked Ethereum wrappers are basically just an inescapable conclusion. I agree with Darren that because of the likely high returns for Ethereum on Ethereum 2.0 as a natively staked asset, that we could very quickly run into this new paradigm where Ethereum itself is no longer traded, but only wrapped versions of it are traded, and all of these wrapped versions are all slightly different. It could be that they're all essentially interchangeable, and so you won't really mind which one of these you are holding so long as you're exposed to the same interest rate. But then some of them, are rebasings, right? So that they do maintain a one-to-one correlation with the Ethereum price, rather than this kind of pool token-like behavior that causes them to appreciate over time. And so for what I've been trying to do with the design of Bancor version 3 is to ask whether or not this is going to be true for all assets. I think for something like Ethereum, and potentially other proof of stake layer 1 tokens, because of the special nature of the native asset, right, of the layer 1 asset, these kinds of wrappers are helpful in other ways, because if the ETH doesn't even adhere to its own ERC20 standards, and so in a way this has made it necessary to even have wrapped versions of ETH even before it was being used for validation, right? So WETH predates ETH staking by quite a ways, and it's really to make ETH an asset that is fungible and composable the same way that all other tokens on Ethereum are. So I think that these wrappers for layer 1 tokens are necessary and actually positive. But for other protocols and other liquid staking derivatives, I want to just say that what Darren has achieved and what RocketPool has achieved with our ETH is kind of the mirror image of what Bancor is trying to achieve, right? Or at least one of the concepts that we are introducing, which is that in many cases, I don't think that the wrapped version of an asset is going to be as tradable or as attractive as the asset itself. So, for example, something like the Chainlink token, if native staking is going live allegedly this year, then imagine what would happen if the Chainlink network was similarly overwhelmed with staking demand, then all of these link tokens that are being staked across Chainlink's network, if they're not issuing a wrapper for Link, and I haven't seen any discussion of that occurring, then the Link token could actually start finding itself in a situation where it's without price discovery due to the illiquidity created by the demand for staking. And so I do think that this is something that's in an industry blind spot, and it's worth asking whether staking the asset itself is as attractive as staking the liquid derivative of it. So, for example, imagine taking something like our ETH and staking it on a validator rather than staking Ethereum, right? So that all of the ETH that was provided is instead delivered to some other location. And that allows ETH itself to remain liquid, while our ETH can be the illiquid component. Like as I said before, and I just want to be clear on this, I don't think that this is ever going to happen for Ethereum validation, just because of the way that the network is organized. But for other smart contracts, I think that this is absolutely the way that things can happen, and would help to resolve some of the illiquidity problems that arise from competition between liquidity staking in AMMs like Bancor, and native staking applications such as securing the Chainlink network. So yeah, rather than so I just wanted to point out that there's actually two different approaches here that are being discussed. One is stake the asset itself and be delivered a wrapper, and that wrapper can be traded as normal and kept liquid. The other one, and this is what Bancor version 3 is introducing for the first time, is stake the asset itself, receive the pool token, and then stake the pool token instead, so that the underlying asset can remain liquid. And these are equal and opposite approaches. And I think that both of them will have, utility. Yeah, I think that that's the that's the point that I wanted to make, is that liquid staking can mean two different things. And Bancor version 3's technology for the first time allows the wrapper itself to be the thing that's stakeable, and that leaves the underlying asset liquid in the market at all times.
Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like this is what you were leaning towards, what you were trying to get at with the link pool discussion that we had in the LPL token.
Yeah, correct. It's also it's also the major theme that was underpinning my workshop at ETH Denver. But yeah, it's exactly what I was getting at with LPL. And we've actually had this conversation now with a few different teams, and there are more all the time. I'm actually hoping that we're going to be able to set up an AMA with Tempest Finance to talk about how this paradigm can be used to solve the paradox of voting tokens and liquidity. So just like with ETH and the competition that it has for staking on Beacon Chain, you can generalize some of this argument to any application for a token that isn't liquidity provision. The most common one is voting. So in general, if you have a DAO governance token, and the implicit value of that governance token comes from the success of your DAO, right? Or the demand for people to want to participate in that DAO because of how successful or important it is. Then you've kind of got an incentive to buy that token and then stake it in the governance contracts that run that group. However, if you're doing that, let's say as a very large net worth individual, then you might be inadvertently harming the token price, all right, or the token's ability to realize its valuation, by removing so much of it from the market in order to use it for its intended use case. So let's say that, for example, the Uniswap token, that as a token that governs Uniswap, lots of people decide that that's what they want to do, right? They want to buy the Uniswap token so that they can participate in Uniswap's governance. As they buy it and remove it from the market, it becomes increasingly illiquid. And the point that I was trying to make at ETH Denver is that as your token becomes illiquid, the market tends to lose confidence in it. There's this old, sort of pre-2020 bull thesis that illiquidity is a good thing, right? That when liquidity ends up thin on the ground, that it means that price appreciation of that asset is all but guaranteed. But we now know that this just absolutely isn't true. That it essentially means that those high net worth individuals basically no longer want to interface with your token anymore. And without them, being able to speculate on things or move things around or find an entry position for themselves simply because the market can't support their appetite. It means that the token basically has the rug pulled out from underneath it, and it tends to drift away from the market in a really price negative way. And so what we're trying to resolve with Bancor version 3 is a way to solve that dichotomy of how do you keep a token liquid while still being able to use it for its intended use case. So coming back to the Uniswap token as an example, let's say that a lot of the Uniswap community are wanting to take exposure to Uni, but they are also wanting to use it to vote on proposals all the time, right? Let's say that Uniswap's governance ends up super active, and they need to start staking all of these Uni tokens to excuse me, to run their governance correctly. What we're proposing is that they could stake it in an AMM like Bancor and receive a single-sided pool token, and then stake that single-sided pool token for voting rights, and that would be just as effective as staking the Uni itself, except that it means that all of the staked Uni is now available for price discovery, which is such an important aspect of keeping the market healthy. And so this is once you realize that that particular property, right, the competition between voting and liquidity is general, right? It's generic. It's something that affects, I would say, more than 90% of tokens, as so many DAO tokens are now in circulation. That this is potentially quite a pervasive issue that I would say that the industry doesn't really have a very good understanding of yet. But yeah, I don't think that what Bancor is doing is in any way in competition with RocketPool, because it's literally impossible to use an ERC20 token to secure a beacon chain. It really has to be the ETH native token or nothing by design. But in many other use cases, I do think that the Bancor's solution is a compelling one.
So going to RPL, Darren, that is your governance token, is that right?
Actually, it's our kind of utility token. So what RPL is used for is each of our node operators, when they kind of deposit into RocketPool and they create these validators, they need to also supply RPL collateral as well. So, and that's kind of like an insurance promise to the protocol that if they do anything nefarious, and if they
I think we lost you. You're cutting out a little bit. Are you still there?
It's kind of one of these things. Oh no.
We talked too much about rugs. Okay, you know what I'm going to do? I have a request here from somebody in the community. I'm going to see, Mark, his question could possibly be for you.
Sure. I can finish Darren's thought for him.
Okay.
But it's essentially the RPL token is like it's part of the insurance policy. So essentially, if a node operator wants to use the ETH that RocketPool has access to spin up one of their nodes, to become a to make use of, exactly, thank you, to become a validator, make use of that Ethereum, they need to own a certain amount of RPL, and then the RocketPool contracts can essentially use that as a ransom, so that if the validator behaves inappropriately, then the RPL contracts can essentially confiscate that those RPL tokens, and then I guess use that as compensation for the people that might have lost their ETH in that process.
That's exactly it. Thanks, Mark.
And you're back.
Welcome back. We can hear you again.
My wife arrived in the car, and the car took my microphone. Yes, that's right. So RPL is used as collateral as an insurance promise, and exactly that. If they're very neglectful of their validator, we can slash their RPL. And that's in the kind of very, very worst cases. That's essentially RPL. So actually each node operator needs a minimum amount of RPL. So currently it's 1.6 Ether worth of RPL, but they can actually stake more than that. And the reason why they would stake more than that is because they're giving, I guess, more of an insurance promise to the protocol. The RPL token has an inflation rate of 5%, and 70% of that goes to node operators. So it's also kind of like a reward for being a node operator. And the more they stake, the more of a share of that kind of inflation they get.
So I wonder then, would the same thing kind of apply with the BN RPL? Mark, what you were saying earlier about how you can stake the derivative of it in order to get like both of those, keep that on like liquid, then they can stake, like say they want to stake more RPL.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that, in that system, it's impossible to disrupt the ETH staking. It's just got way too much momentum, and like I said, ETH is a special token. But the RPL component, that's, I think, something that we could collaborate on, absolutely. So let's say that let's say that RPL becomes the de facto way to stake Ethereum. And, I'd say that I've said that there are many projects, but I don't think any are as advanced, right, or as sophisticated, as developed, as old as RPL is. There are going to be many of them. Like I said, things like Stakeout are coming along, but they've already got sort of a tarnished track record because of the fiasco with Fireblocks and everything else. So could RocketPool become the industry standard preferred staking service for Beacon Chain? Absolutely, it could happen. And so if that happens, what would happen to demand for RPL, right? As Darren has pointed out, it would mean that the RPL token, a lot of it would need to be purchased and removed from the market so that it could be used as collateral, as kind of, a way to secure RPL's own staking, and protect users, capital against theft and malicious intent and other things. So if it becomes that popular, then RPL could become very scarce. And like I said at the beginning of this call, that scarcity argument for like the bull case of an asset has now been defeated about more than a dozen times over the last year, because as it becomes scarce, people basically refuse to stop speculating on it. And so one of the ways that we could, that we could work together, for example, is rather than require, node operators to stake RPL directly, they could stake BN RPL, right, as the necessary collateral. And it serves exactly the same use case, because as a single-sided, fully insured pool token, they still stand to lose exactly the same value as if they were losing the RPL itself, if we were confiscating it from them during a malicious event. But better than that, because the BN RPL, like our ETH, is gaining value over time due to swap fees and other things, that confiscating the BN RPL actually serves to punish them even more than if they had just staked RPL itself. The counter argument to this, or I would say the naive counter argument to this, is that it hurts price appreciation of the staked asset, which just isn't true. In general, keeping healthy markets for a token is critical to its price appreciation, for reasons that I've already alluded to. Essentially, that if you bottleneck the value transmission to a token, by limiting how much of it is exchangeable for other forms of value, it means that the people with a lot of that token and the people without any of that token both have very little faith in whatever price they're being quoted. And so having a large amount of liquidity supporting whatever price is being quoted is generally preferable to having a high price and very little liquidity, because a very small amount of buying or selling pressure can start to move the price around in a very violent way. So yeah, that is exactly the type of use case that Bancor is looking to solve.
Thank you. I want to get to White Boy Punk. I have one more question. And, you were talking about Darren's, RocketPool's competition and possibly becoming like the de facto staking other than Beacon Chain, for ETH. And I saw a thread. It was referencing ethereum.org, and it was giving RocketPool, like if you go to ethereum.org and you go to staking ETH, it asks you, do you have 32 ETH or do you have less than 32? And when you go to less than 32, I mean, right there, you can stake on RocketPool. And there was, threads with your competitors and comparing them. And I just want to get your take. A couple of your competitors, you said you're the first and only decentralized ETH staking protocol. So the ones that, like, Mark, the one that you mentioned, Darren, are they not decentralized?
So yeah, we have a bit of a no drama policy, so I haven't kind of dived into that thread. But what I can say is that we, as I said, all of our competitors, they're essentially permission node operators, whereas RocketPool is permissionless. So as anybody can be a node operator with RocketPool, you just need 16 ETH, a little bit of RPL, and then kind of enough technical knowledge to run an Ethereum validator, which is not as hard as it seems. And we've kind of coached a lot of people to where they need to be with that, and we give them all the tools and everything to be able to do it. So a lot of companies in the staking space, they want to run validators for you, but in actual fact, you can actually run validators yourself. If you don't want to run a validator, then you have RETH on the other side, the liquid staking side. So in which case, all you need to do is own a token, and that's really simple as well. So in our case, we have, as I said, 870 node operators. Our competitors don't have that. So they're not as decentralized as that. And so that's where we consider ourselves the most decentralized option out there.
Awesome. Thank you. If you guys have a few minutes, White Boy Punk, you've been waiting so patiently. If you're still there, I'd like to give you the floor and ask your question.
Hey, thank you, Jen. Do you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm just a finance student who's been, looking into DeFi a little bit more and considering, staking as like, I guess, an alternative to like traditional fixed income or passive income. And I heard about Bancor like about a year ago, and I was just dabbling and trading the token at the time. But now I'm just thinking about actually using the platform. And I just wanted to ask two general questions. Firstly, is there like a timeline on Bancor V3?
Yeah, sure. So we've said that version 3 is targeting Q1 release, but we tend to stay away from hard dates just because with software development, it kind of always is a fuzzy target until things are ready. But we're really deep into the auditing process now. And so everything is looking like we're going to be able to meet that Q1 release schedule without too many problems.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I understand the no hard deadlines thing for sure. Okay, thank you. That clears it up though. But secondly, for the general question, like what, if any, like resources would you recommend for someone who's trying to learn more about Bancor network and like specifically staking on the website?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. I think I would recommend more of these AMAs. So this one, the AMAs that we're doing with Jen, with special guests such as Darren, and these are all going to be very good. I would say sort of increasing your general knowledge. But just as this call has a specific theme, a lot of our calls moving forward are also going to have a specific theme, and so you could find yourself, let's say, a little out of your depth, right? If you're brand new to DeFi and you haven't, you haven't had to think about these kinds of concepts before, or you aren't already familiar with the technology and some of the vocabulary that comes with it, such as, we've spoken about wrappers and things like that on this call. And I imagine that some of those things would be fairly alien concepts to you if you haven't, been around the industry, over the last couple of years. I do think that the best way to learn about these, to learn the culture, learn the lingua, and also learn the products and how they work, is to really get involved with the community. So we have a bunch of different resources, such as our discourse. So there's a website called gov.bancor.network, and you'll see there is essentially all of our old governments documentation. So all of the discussions that are being had by community members, a lot of the proposals, in fact, all of the proposals that have ever been submitted for a DAO decision are there. You can see all of the comments and drafting process that it's gone into making those documents and that sort of thing. So that's kind of a good place to start. But again, it could be a little bit in the weeds. But there's still a lot of really helpful, explainers and discussions there that I think is a really good place to get started. In addition to that, the Bancor Telegram channels are extremely helpful. So there's two main ones. There's the Bancor protocol itself Telegram channel. And this one is sort of the moderated, supervised, Telegram channel. So that one has it observes very specific rules, including things like no price talk and other stuff. And it's kind of the official channel. So if you've got questions, we generally have moderators and admins in that channel that can answer a lot of it, or put you in contact with someone who can answer a lot of it. Then we've also got the more community-oriented ones, which are unmoderated, unsupervised, such as the Bancor Liquidity Providers channel, and several other sort of spin-out channels from there. And so meeting other people within the community, seeing how they're thinking about things is extremely helpful. And then the other resource is Discord. So Bancor, like many cryptocurrency projects, has its own Discord server. And there, there's a bunch of sort of breakout groups and everything else that focus on specific components. So, yeah, all of those resources are there. But then more than anything, I would say that just as you're wading through all of this material, you should feel free to reach out to me directly, right? I've made it sort of a personal policy that if any community member wants to discuss any aspect of the protocol, that I'll always make myself available for that. And so you can reach me on Twitter with a DM, or you can reach out to me on Telegram when you find me there. And we can set up a Google conference meeting or whatever, and we can discuss these things as you progress through it. I have a personal ambition that all of our community members should understand how AMMs operate in explicit detail. And so if that's a personal goal that you have for yourself, then I want to help you realize it.
For sure. Thank you, Mark. That's great. I definitely will reach out. And that clears a lot of things up. Okay, so I do have one more, like, I guess, kind of specific question about staking, if I may ask, if you guys are up for it.
Yeah, for sure.
So like I'm here on the Bancor network like website, right? And I'm looking at the APR column. So obviously we're providing liquidity to like currency pairs, right? So if we look at Ethereum slash BNT, I see it says 42.4% for BNT and 4.42 for ETH. So it's one-sided staking, right? So if I provide only ETH, that means I'm getting an APR of 4.4. And if I provide only BNT, that means I'm getting an APR of 42.4.
Correct. Yeah. And that's partly because there's a part of the DeFi culture the last 12 months has been this idea of using inflationary rewards schedules to incentivize protocol participation. And you can think of this as kind of a stock split or, like an equity sharing program. But essentially, stakers dilute out non-stakers. That's the premise behind it. And so on Bancor, part of that equity is also shared with the TKN side. And this has helped to grow the community quite significantly. But because it is a part of the BNT inflation at the moment, it's important that the BNT holders are receiving the majority of those emissions. And so that split for the inflation on pools where it's active, you should see one of the columns has got like it's like a rewards column, and it'll say something like rewards active, or there'll be a little timer there or something. Those are the pools that are currently incentivized, and ETH is one of them. And if you are a BNT staker to that pool, you're receiving 70% of that inflation, which is why there is a discrepancy between the ETH side and the BNT side. Whereas on the pools where there are no incentives, like you should see SNX there right underneath.
Yeah,
I think
see it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so those ones, because there's no emissions profile associated with it, then the TKN side and the BNT side are receiving essentially the same value, because it's entirely driven by swap revenue, and both sides of the pool receive swap revenue in equal proportion. I hope that has addressed it.
For sure. Okay, yeah, I mean, for understanding it, I'm not there yet, but I just wanted to make sure that that's what that meant, that it means that you'll get 42.4 versus 4.42 on ETH if you stake BNT. So, I mean, in terms of like calculating like returns though, I mean, I know in finance traditionally, like for especially fixed income products, we have like the future value formula where it's like present value times one plus the interest rate to the power of how many periods it's compounded by. So is that how you would calculate returns here with the APR?
No, I mean, you can, but it's making the underlying assumption that APR is stable, which it isn't.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so on that page, you'll see that there's in the bottom left, there's kind of like a tools section, or like a helpful link section, which has got the Bancor governance documents, but also the Bancor analytics site. So if you click on that, it will take you to a sort of a skinned interface to an Ethereum, Ethereum blockchain database called Dune. And now we've already got a bunch of preloaded queries, and within those queries are the daily and weekly and monthly APRs. And so you can kind of use that if you wanted to create a grand average. But in general, these interest rates are extremely volatile. So being able to calculate that out into the future right now, I'd say, is an extremely ambitious event. But pretty soon, I'm expecting that DeFi will have sort of the first interest rate swaps introduced that would allow, for example, futures markets to be created against yield. We've already sort of halfway there with protocols like Pendle and AP Wine and others. They can actually split the principal and yield components of many of these DeFi protocols from each other, and then create markets with the yield only. And so this means that things like fixed interest rates are likely to be just around the corner. But for now, I would say it is extremely volatile and is necessarily extremely volatile. But it still beats hodling, right? Like any return is better than none at all. But yeah, the fixed income products, they will be coming. It's a problem that no one has really managed to break yet. And I think that it's partially because of the intrinsic volatility of cryptocurrency as an asset class, that we still haven't managed to solve it yet. But that characteristic volatility is slowly dampening over time. And I think that as the markets become more settled, that fixed income products will become much more accessible.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, okay. So just one quick question and then I'll get out of here and someone else can ask questions if they have. But just let's assume, right, that the rates weren't volatile and you could use that equation that I mentioned to you earlier. Like, what would the periods be here, right? Like, because it's one plus R to the like N, which is the periods, right? So like how often does it compound, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's a couple of there's a couple of other assumptions that we need to talk about there, which is that these those interest rates are generated from swaps, right? From token swaps. And so it could be that the interest actually levels off over time, right? Plateaus rather than remains constant, even though demand for swapping the token does remain constant. What do I mean by that? As the pool accumulates fee revenue inside of itself, it could be that because the underlying store of capital is growing, but the demand to use that capital remains constant, then the swap revenue as a proportion of the size of the pool is actually going down, right? And so that would mean that the interest rate would actually level off. But that's not necessarily true, right? We don't know that that's going to happen. It could be that as swaps continue to grow the size of the pool, that means that the pool is now more deep. It can support larger trades, and the reduced slippage attracts larger trades and things like that. And that would mean that the interest rate as a proportion of the pool will remain consistent. And in that case, we can make the assumption that it would compound the way that you're wanting to. But I'd say that, this is something that we should probably take offline. I'm happy to go over some of these concepts with you. But yes, if we make the assumption that the demand to use the pool's capital scales with the size of the pool, then you can use that compounding equation, the one that you want to. But if that's a bad assumption, right? If the way that the pool scales is decoupled from the demand to use the pool itself, then that equation won't work and you need to do something else.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And sorry if I took you guys off topic. All right.
No, that's
thank you
fine.
so much.
All questions are welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the call.
Of course.
Thank you. Zero, you have a question for us if you want to go ahead. And thank you, White Boy Punk. Appreciate you joining in and asking your questions.
Thank you, Jen.
All right. Hi, Mark. I'm a very big fan of Bancor and like the very B3 kind of initiative and all the upgrades that are coming. I'm very excited for all of them. I actually went to ETH Denver and wanted to listen to your talk, but I ended up standing in the line right outside waiting for an hour to get in. But
It's a nightmare, I know.
yeah, it was really bad. But I kind of had the time to re-listen to your talk over YouTube and then kind of formulate a plan to where RocketPool might be able to integrate BNRPL into the protocol. But then I came into a problem to where, and this is kind of like an edge case situation to where you might have so much RPL or a specific amount of RPL in a liquidity pool. And so if it's already in a liquidity pool, you have BNRPL or BN token, whichever one, but you also have all these other people buying into the token as well and staking it to get the utility out of the BNRPL token. Do you see any kind of, I guess, risk to the Bancor protocol when you have way more BN tokens than the actual like tokens itself in the liquidity pool?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what you've essentially described is partly the impermanent loss paradox, right? That is kind of how this thing eventually plays out. That the balance of the token that's being valued by the secondary markets is slowly disappearing from your liquidity pool. So it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same situation as regular IL. And so the question is that a problem? Well, it's not a problem in the specific use case that we're discussing here, because the BN RPL pool token is still denominated entirely in RPL. And so it really comes down to whether or not the insurance mechanism that Bancor has introduced is good enough to make sure that just because there are fewer RPL tokens there, that the liquidity provider hasn't actually lost any of that intrinsic value, right? That the dollar position that they have remains the same as if they did have all of those RPL tokens. And so, is that a problem? I mean, it's a problem in the sense that IL is a problem. But remember, we still have these other mechanisms in place to help try to offset some of those effects. So, for example, as people are buying RPL in order to participate in RocketPool because they want to set up their own validator, or they want to set up their because they want to set up their own validator, or they want to speculate on the RPL price, which is totally reasonable. As they're doing that, 15% of the swap revenue is partially being confiscated by the protocol in order to help offset the cost of IL. And that's happening across the entire protocol. The other thing is that it's probably, in my opinion, never a good assumption that all of the token that is being bought and that it's being traded across the pool is specifically going to be used for for its intended use case. I think that it's possible that will happen slowly over time. And that's kind of a part of this natural this natural value growth that you would see to a token that paint the sorts of charts that Bitcoin and Ethereum do. But these kinds of sudden shocks, like we saw with AXS, are generally are generally unsustainable and are generally short-lived. And the reason why they're short-lived is that when you get those sudden price appreciations, there is this equal and opposite force that previous token holders are suddenly compelled or are suddenly motivated to sell the tokens that they bought at an earlier price, but now the higher price. And so in a way, like I treat these kinds of events, an equilibrium like any other, right? They're still governed by Le Chatelier's principle and everything else. So what I'm saying there is that if people are buying these RPLs and then restaking them in the pool to create the BN RPL so that they can create a node with the ETH that has been entrusted to RocketPool, that's fine, because as they're doing that price appreciation then it means that there's a new opportunity for someone else to realize some of the gains on the BN RPL that they've been previously awarded. And the withdrawal algorithm that we've implemented with Bancor version 3 allows that to be to be a very natural part of the process. So is it a problem? Yes, absolutely, right? IL is always a problem, but is it one that I think that we have a compelling answer to? Also, yes, right? I think that the way that we've built up version 3 in order to deal with specifically the situation that you're referring to is good enough that I'm not overly concerned. It's something that we need to pay attention to, and I do I want this to be an ongoing collaboration with other token projects that are looking to implement the BN tokens as a supplement to the token itself, because it is something that we need to keep an eye on. But I don't see it as being it's not an attack surface area, right? It's not an exploit or anything else. It's just IL as usual. And so one of the ways to combat this or manage it more effectively is just limiting the size of the pool, right? So one of the things I said earlier is that on Bancor version 3, we can adjust the size of the trading liquidity such that it is exactly what the market needs it to be. So if you want a little bit more volatility, we can do that by simply allowing the protocol to hodl a little bit more of the RPL that it was entrusted with, and trade on a slightly contracted liquidity curve to bring back some of that volatility and really stress the price discovery if it needs to happen. And when we do that, the cost of providing IL protection to RPL is significantly reduced, while also supporting a greater trade revenue, which also means that more fees are confiscated and burned as an insurance premium, which helps to cover the cost of the IL protection. So there is, it requires an extremely sophisticated analysis suite, which is why I recently made a new machine learning hire. And this is going to go into sort of a new dashboard that monitors the health of version 3, and eventually provides recommendations to the DAO on specific settings, including the pool size. So yeah, it is a problem, and it's one that we need to be mindful of and keep constant tabs on. But is it is the scale of the problem so great that we can't deal with it? No, absolutely not. I think that we should feel comfortable taking on these kinds of challenges.
Okay. Yeah, that was kind of a lot to take in, but yeah, it kind of makes sense if you're able to offset a lot of the risk by holding a lot of the native tokens instead of allowing for all of it to be used for liquidity trading.
Yeah, and this is this is going to be a concept that we need to develop further. It's a big, the education curve for this is pretty steep. But yeah, keep tuning into these AMAs because we're going to be revisiting these topics again and again for years, I promise.
I just had like one other question, and I think it's based on B3 specifically, and it was more of a freezing function that I think you guys implemented in the case of a flash crash. Do you think you could talk on that, or like how long it would last? What would you be looking for in those cases?
Yeah. So are you talking about when a pool becomes illiquid?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is an emergency measure that, in order for the protocol to work, we basically need to come up with some arbitrary line in the sand where we say beyond a certain liquidity threshold, we no longer trust the price being reported by that pool. As pools become illiquid, you can do all kinds of strange things with them. And this is something that, we need to keep checks on. And so, yeah, what we've said is, I think in the current proposal, if a pool ever has less than 1,000 BNT in it, that the protocol shouldn't trust it. Now, we still allow it to keep trading, by the way. So if a pool drops below that liquidity threshold due to a flash crash, as you said, but then recovers, right? If it bounces and manages to recover its liquidity before someone else interacts with the pool for liquidity provision or withdrawals, then the pool will be fine. So it's impossible, for example, to arbitrarily or artificially force a pool from trading simply by trading it below that liquidity threshold for BNT. However, if it maintains itself below that level, and someone performs a withdrawal or a liquidity provision event is processed while it's below that level, and it remains below that level at the end of that liquidity change, then the protocol will essentially withdraw all of the TKN and all of the BNT from the pool, destroy all of the BNT that it had, and then basically just stop trading the TKN. Now, this essentially returns the pool back to its bootstrapping phase. And that will mean that it requires a DAO MSIG intervention to get the pool back up and running. But this is a good opportunity then for the DAO to examine what actually happened with that pool, right? Like, was this some kind of attack, right? Or was some kind of hack trying to be performed? Or is it just a dysfunctional token that the market has given up on? It's important that these kinds of things get raised, and that there's an automated way for for these potential issues to be brought to the DAO's attention. So how long could it last? Potentially forever. If a token is just illiquid now because no one's using it, then maybe that pool will never come back, right? And this gives us a way to to slowly shed liability to tokens that we no longer want on the protocol. Now, if that ever happens, you can still withdraw, by the way. So if you owned any of those tokens, the protocol will allow you to withdraw them as normal. That's not a problem. It does interrupt some of the withdrawal mechanisms, and these things are described in detail in the proposal. But because of the diminishingly small size of the pool, when we stop trusting it, it's really unlikely to be an issue for anyone. And if it was a deliberate attack, and we do want to bootstrap that pool again, then this has protected the protocol from potential damage. And that means that we can, revise what happened, and then discuss whether or not we want to reboot the pool up. but potentially that could be as little as a few days. We really only need 3 days for a proposal to rebootstrap the pool to be considered and voted by the DAO. So yeah, I would say if this ever happens, and there's no guarantee that it will, it's just a precaution. But if it does, potentially the pool would just be non-trading for, you know, like a week or something like that.
Did that answer your question, Sarah?
Yeah, it's just so much information that I'm just kind of processing, so it's taking me a little bit to figure
like I said,
everything out.
if we want to set up a if you want to set up a dedicated call, we can go over all of these things in as much detail as you like. Just send me a DM and we'll get something on the calendar.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Do we have one more guest from the audience? If we have time for one more question, you guys, I appreciate you all. Glenn, if you wanna jump on.
Hey, yeah, sure, I'll jump on. This is for Darren. I guess my question is, I know you guys have built all this infrastructure for liquid staking on Ethereum. I'm wondering if you guys are also considering other potentially L1 blockchains that also have this problem. They have, you know, they're proof of stake and they might need some sort of a liquid staking derivative. Is that something that you guys are considering in the future, potentially expanding to other blockchains?
So, I mean, we're not going to rule it out for the future, but I would say, or for the very future, but in the short, medium term, and even kind of the long term, we're focusing on Ethereum. The reason why we're doing that is because there's a lot that we need to do in this space. So we've got enough to do there. As I said, we're not ruling out other chains completely. Particularly L2s. L2s, we will do some more work to kind of leverage L2s in the short to medium term. So we will definitely be doing that. But at the moment, Ethereum is where we are. As I said, we're not ruling out completely.
I see. Thanks for that. I guess I'll look forward to what you guys have to release in the future.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our roadmap, the short term is the merge, because that is happening very, very soon. So we're working with the client teams to kind of get that available and out there. We're also doing some optimizations to make being a node operator, I guess, even more profitable. So reducing some of the smart contract costs and all that sort of thing. Then we're kind of looking at leveraging L2s, kind of more and more, and integrations with different projects on L2s. And then kind of the next thing we're working on is things like, there's a technology called DVT, which is distributed validate, which enables distributed validators. So essentially that would enable us to, at the moment you need 16 ETH and 1.6 ETH worth of RPL to run a validator with RocketPool. But with this new technology, it may be possible to get that to less than that. So that's what we'll be working on in the future. As I said, our goal is to get, is to democratize Ethereum staking. So get it out to as many people as possible so that everyone can participate in this, in providing security for Ethereum.
I see. Just to follow up real quick, is there any particular L2 you guys are looking at? I know from our end, once B3 is released, we're going to have to make a choice as to where we go. And, there's some options out there. Arbitrum Optimism, and Starknet is also like kind of promising, but still in beta. Just curious if you guys have any like preferred solution, or are you guys looking at all of them?
So from an RETH perspective, it's super simple because RETH is just an ERC20 token, so that can go on any L2, and in fact, it's already on Arbitrum. You can purchase RETH on Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, and zk Sync. So we've got a lot of those covered. So that's the easy part. The harder part is kind of getting some of our kind of node operator operations onto L2s, and that's what we'll kind of look at to see what's available, what's practical.
I see.
That is a bit further away. So
Right.
we haven't dived into it that much.
Cool. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I think with that, I don't think we have any more questions. I want to thank Mark and Darren so much for being guests and coming on the show, and really just teaching us about liquid staking and the advantages and kind of what we have to look forward to as far as DeFi composability. I'm excited to see where it leads us with the future. So thank you both so much, and thank you to everybody for joining in and listening.
Thank you, Jen, as normal. And yeah, Darren, thank you so much. It's been a terrific having this conversation with you.
Yeah, it's been fun. I've enjoyed it, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, guys. You all have a great night.
Bye. See you.